Well, welcome everybody. We're looking forward to a very interesting and in-depth but fast-paced opportunity on our continued series of a whole of government R&D showcase titled Building Resilience and Innovation Equity. Today, our focus is on building infrastructure and resilience, which I know is of great interest to almost every region, every community across the country. I'm Richard Seline. I'm the co-founder of the Resilience Innovation Hub and Collaboratory Network. Our flagship is based in Houston, Texas, and I'll be the moderator for today's timely conversation. Let me put a couple of things in context as we get going, kind of also put a little bit of a level set. Every community over the past 24 months across the country has experienced persistent levels of disasters, risk, and sadly, ongoing economic and societal threats to our global competitiveness. All the indicators are pointing towards a continued trend affecting urban and rural geographies, rich and poor neighborhoods, traditional and emerging industries. However, there is actually some positive counterforce news and information, as well as activities guided by significant scientific and technological advances. Our conversation today will highlight how the U.S. government researchers are working collaboratively with each other and with industry, academic, and entrepreneurs to reduce multi-billion-dollar costs of these disasters and risks. You will hear about these initiatives to solve long-plaguing challenges to ensure both our public and private infrastructure of the future remains resilient, equitable, secure, and economically competitive. So with that as a backdrop, let's get going. And I'll now introduce our panel. Dr. David Alexander, Director, Research and Partnerships at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate, commonly referred to as S&T. Thank you, David, for joining us. Regan Murray is the Division Director, Water Infrastructure, Office of Research and Development, Center for Environmental Solutions and Emergency Response at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Regan, thank you for joining us as well. Hayes Jones joins us as the Resilient Security and Agency Engagement Lead with the Federal Energy Management Program at the U.S. Department of Energy, commonly referred to as DOE. Hayes will be talking a lot about the areas of energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is a part of the backdrop of that management program. And last but not least is Igor Linkov. Igor is the Senior Scientific Technical Manager at the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center for the Army Corps of Engineers, headquartered out of Mississippi, but truly a national resource for every one of the regional and local offices of the Army Corps of Engineers. With that, let me start our brief discussion. David, let me ask you to step in initially and then Regan to follow up. David, it appears that our physical and digital infrastructure has reached a tipping point. In the face of hurricanes, floods, wildfires, man-made threats such as cyber hacking, there are no easy fixes, especially for those sectors the nation depends on daily, like health, transportation, utilities, food, and financial. We've even seen literally in the past 72 hours some continued hacking threatening that infrastructure. So David, recognizing disaster fatigue is a real challenge for citizens and businesses. What role does research, science, technology play in helping communities frame problems and identify solutions? And as a follow-up, why does research matter for building resilience to withstand these disasters?
Great, Richard, thank you. So history has shown that when our nation has faced some of its toughest challenges, research and development has played a critical role in propelling us forward. In other words, research and development combined with continuous learning builds resilience. As you noted, the threat landscapes are evolving, accelerating in pace and scale. We've just come out of the greatest non-military crisis of our nation's history, the COVID-19 pandemic, where every facet of our nation was impacted. So what better time to strengthen our infrastructure, smarter in the future, to think innovatively about how we can get more out of these assets, reconsider how they strengthen and build our community resilience to deliver more value and promote more equitable outcomes for everyone. For instance, rethinking our water infrastructure to not just supply us with a life-sustaining commodity or protect our environment through better waste management, but also as a continuous monitoring, diagnostic, and early warning system for some of the threats we faced. For wastewater-based epidemiology to detect early biological threats, to speed up response, protective measures by combining the resilience elements of design and intervention into our systems. That gives you some context to why research matters. So I'll turn it back to you, Richard.
Thank you, David. Regan, he gave you a little bit of a nice segue there about water. So faced with these new demands and the need to help communities bounce back more effectively and build more capacity on the front end, what programs exist to help communities improve water system resilience?
Yes, thank you, Richard, and thank you, David. With more than 50,000 water systems across our country, each of them unique in many ways in terms of their source water, their treatment, their customers, their capabilities, EPA is developing resources to help all of these water systems build resilience. We're also conducting research that addresses the most critical needs among these water systems nationwide. So first, we have information, guidance, case studies, best practices, webinars, training, a lot of information on a variety of resilience topics. These include information about how to assess risks to disasters, how to plan and prepare for emergencies, train staff, and to develop strategies for how to actually respond and recover during an incident. This information is useful for water systems of all different sizes and types. In addition, in collaboration with our federal, state, tribal, and local partners, we also have a robust research program, which is addressing the outstanding data and technological gaps that are needed to improve the resilience of drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. For drinking water, we've developed what's called the Water Network Tool for Resilience, or WINTER. That is a modeling and simulation tool and a set of approaches that can help assess the risks of natural disasters in drinking water systems. And it's also used to design and evaluate mitigation strategies. Through case studies with individual water systems, we're helping communities around the country improve their resilience to extreme weather events, long-term power outages, coastal risks, and other types of disasters. We're also working with communities on how to manage stormwater during extreme weather events, and we've developed scientific data on the performance of green infrastructure technologies, from rain gardens to permeable pavement to green spaces. And finally, we're also working in the area of water reuse. So given the stresses on our water supply, we're looking at developing risk-based guidance on how to effectively treat wastewater so that it can be reused for a variety of purposes.
Regan, thank you. I know EPA has been really stepping up a lot of this work around this one water type of approach. So thank you for y'all's leadership. Igor, let me turn to you from the Army Corps' perspective. To increase the level of resilience in new infrastructure and to prevent failures in existing infrastructure, governmental research dollars are needed to incentivize greater public, private, and even philanthropic investments. Can you speak to how the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is making its investments to modernize our infrastructure and therefore strengthen economic resilience? To example, things that we've now realized coming out of COVID, areas that will reduce the impact of disruptions on supply chains. Igor?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Army Corps has great experience building infrastructure going back 200 years ago. And of course, resilience was important. But what happened in the past, we used best engineering judgment to build resilient infrastructure. But now we need to replace engineering judgment by solid science. And what is unique about resilience is that it's fundamentally social construct. Resilience requires assessment of critical function and recovery of critical function after disruption. And if we talk about critical function, it means that they're critical for specific stakeholders, specific communities. And what is critical for one community may not be critical to another. So Army Corps really start thinking about this social science aspect of resilience. And we start working with communities far more closer. And we are bringing science of engineering with social science to really resolve these important challenges. I can say about some internal program that we started. We're developing new focus area on research side of Army Corps within Army Engineer Research and Development Center, where I'm part of. So, for example, we start crisis response area where we will be focusing on research necessary to really address recovery and adaptation after the crisis. But we start to work with communities. For example, we have a big problem in Arctic, and we know that indigenous population were resilient for ages, right? So we are trying to build programs that would allow us to learn about climate change from practice of tribal members who live in that area. We work with communities on scalability of what we do. Again, we don't like to use the best judgment and best engineering practice to build something that community may not need. We need to be able to tailor and scale our solution to specific needs of the communities. And all that require research investment, as David was saying. And as a government, we really need to work together because resilience is about system. And you have 4 federal people here. We all manage components of the system, but we need to really have a systemic view, and we need to build the whole system approach and whole government approach for resilience. Thank you.
Igor, that's a great point. And I do think you hit a critical note about systematic systems approach. David, real quick thought about this community research and how that connects the system approach?
Yeah, just following up on Igor's comments, it is important that we consider enhancements to our infrastructure, not in isolation. We have to recognize the interconnectedness and interdependencies and those potential cascading impacts and disruptions that result not just from various hazards or threat vectors, but also technological risk. Supply chain disruptions can exacerbate the conditions that result in disaster. So these types of issues require solutions that have to be translational and community driven. They also have to encourage diversity and inclusion in the marketplace of ideas and ensure that all benefit from our R&D investment. And what I mean by that is that we can't just think that only the good ideas come from the federal research. And I think what you're hearing from all of us thus far is that we want to reach out, we want to engage and be more creative in our research collaborations and partnerships. But at the same time, we recognize to be successful, we have to have community buy-in, we have to improve access to expertise, and we have to develop the future workforce so that the communities and the infrastructure operators that we're assisting can adopt that work and sustain them in the future.
Which is now a great segue to some of the most incredible assets that we have, which are the federal lab system and other programs of DOE. So Hayes, much of our infrastructure was built decades ago. Back in the day when planners and engineers didn't account for changes in threats to our environment or the pace of the innovation cycles. Let's talk about what new approaches and technologies are available, helping communities not only recover more effectively from disasters, but frankly, build more resilient capacity on the front end. Hayes? How does the green infrastructure, electric vehicles, and renewable energy help mitigate these risks and expand sustainable investment strategies in the face of climate change and other evolving threats?
Thank you, Richard. The specific green infrastructure and items that you mentioned really help address two of the underlying key attributes that we see in the Federal Energy Management Program within DOE related to resilience, so redundancy and robustness. And as Igor mentioned earlier, taking that systems approach, one of the things we're really focused on is how do we continue the mission, whether it's a mission of a facility or a mission of a federal agency in our case, or another organization. So how do you take that systematic approach to understand what the key requirements are, understand the risks from threats and hazards, what are the exposed vulnerabilities, and how do you prioritize those? So working with our national labs, specifically two of our national labs, Pacific Northwest National Lab and the National Renewable Energy Lab, to leverage their extensive expertise in dealing with their own communities and in piloting these within their research and in their operations themselves. Working together to develop a web-based tool to take organizations through the systematic approach to resilience planning and identify where they can really plug in some of those specific green infrastructure solutions to plug specific gaps that they have at their facilities and to ensure their mission continuity.
Let me throw a couple of national other opportunities and then end on kind of the one big question. Through the work of the Resilient Innovation Hub and the Collaboratory Network, we've really, I think, like all the other folks on this call, have recognized that we're moving into a performance-driven set of outcomes which go into the planning. FEMA, Wharton up at University of Penn and others have identified a minimum of a 1 to 4 cost benefit that needs to be applied to this pre-disaster and risk mitigation approach. So FEMA's got their program, BRIC. EPA is moving towards a similar type of mitigation approach. Bottom line is we see that the opportunity for getting a higher return on the investment from technology, equipment, and integrated data science is changing the landscape immediately to build these partnerships and relationships with federal agencies, academia, state and local government, but most importantly, for ways to unleash entrepreneurs, inventors, and investors. One of the other areas I think all of you recognize within your federal agencies is the critical importance of expanding the presence of both resources as well as innovation to low to moderate income neighborhoods. So with that, let me ask each of y'all to take one very, very quick last push. What would be one action item our audience should take away from our brief conversation today? One critical action item when they listen to this. So, Igor, what's one great takeaway that you would encourage or drive folks to listen and go do?
Resilience should be viewed differently from risk and efficiency of the system. Often is get confused, and they're different. Resilience about recovery and adaptation.
Fantastic. Regan?
Thanks. I just wanted to encourage everyone to learn more about their local water system and the critical services that they provide every day. And also just wanted to say at EPA, we're here to help, whether through technical support or science, we're always here and available to help communities. Thanks.
Great. Hayes?
Encouraging people to think broadly about the stakeholders that can be involved, from the agencies listed here today to the emergency planners to the master planners at their sites or other term planning. Think broadly about your stakeholder base.
Great. And David?
Yeah, I think what is most interesting is this renewed collective awareness as an S&T community that we can't solve the problems on our own or get the multiplier effect you just mentioned unless we accelerate our efforts in moving R&D from the lab to the street. So my key takeaway for the audience today is to get to know DHS S&T, realize we're open to new ideas and novel approaches and non-traditional partnerships. and engage with your civic leaders, your infrastructure operators, so that you can leverage those opportunities going forward.
Well, I knew that we were not going to have enough time. There's so much brain power in the four of y'all that I am reluctant to say that this is all of what we could talk about, but thank you. This was excellent. Let me encourage in this slide that's going to come up on how you as an audience can learn more about each of these individual programs, how you can contact the folks that you heard from briefly this morning. Again, there is a lot of robust information and knowledge out there. So in the days ahead, we hope that you'll review the resources, engage with our speakers, and consider how best to implement even some of the very quick items you heard about. So on behalf of David Alexander at DHS S&T, Regan Murray at EPA, Igor Linkoff at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Hayes Jones at DOE, I'm Richard Seline. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us in this whole of government R&D showcase.